Ankeny, locally owned. I've been around for 27 years. And we are a factoring company, which to most people, they're like, what is that? We actually buy invoices and collect them from our clients. Most of our clients are in the trucking industry. So we are, as like everyone else, is feeling some of the pains of this time that we're living in at the moment. But once freight starts moving again, things will start picking up around here. And again, we thank you for everybody for joining, as well as having the opportunity to sponsor. At the beginning, we would have never known we'd be doing this as a webinar up front. So there's always ways to get your voice heard and our message out. So thank you, and again, enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Troy, and thanks CJM Financial for being our sponsor today and for all of our webinars. And then next up, we'll go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. So we are joined by two attorneys with Lamberti, Gocke Luetje Law Offices. So Laura Luetje is LGL's chief handler of all marriage dissolutions and divorce cases, while simultaneously serving clients in numerous other areas of legal need. William Strong is an associate at the firm. He handles a wide array of cases, focusing on civil litigation, criminal law, guardianships, and conservatorships. That was a little bit of a tough one. And divorce and child custody matters. He also maintains a general practice. So with that, I'll turn it over to William and Laura for the presentation today, and I'll stop sharing my screen so they can take over.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Troy and CJM Financial for sponsoring these webinars. It's awesome that the Chamber and CJM has partnered to do this to help share some information during these unprecedented times. So we appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and share our screen here. And we will get started. First off, just want to tell you a little bit about the firm. So Jessica has mentioned a little bit about each of us, but we are a general practice firm. We've been in Ankeny for over 25 years. We handle a variety of legal needs. So we truly are general practitioners. We handle corporate, small business, family law, guardianships, estate planning, probate, some criminal matters spattered in there. So we really, our goal is to assist our clients in an approach that handles and represents them in all areas that they may seek representation. So we don't want to just do projects for them. We want a client for life, and we want to be able to help guide them and work with a team of professionals to ensure that they're getting the best advice and planning that might be necessary for whatever issues they might be facing. With that, I will lead into a little bit about our discussion in terms of our title. It really does spell out what we hope to share with you today, and definitely want to take any questions and have a discussion too as we're presenting, so don't hesitate to do that. We're all in a very, very strange time. It's unprecedented, and it's been a learning process for all of us. The situation is so fluid in terms of daily changes in different industries and businesses that we understand the need for information gathering, and also the ability to really try and take a practical approach to be able to move forward. So that's what we hope to share with you today. With that, because things are so industry specific and because the situation is so fluid, a lot of what we will tell you is going to be generalized. So we would invite you to reach out to us to have discussions, pick the phone and give us a call. We're more than happy to help, you know, talk through things or answer maybe some simple questions where you just need some answers or are seeking to find out if you are going the right direction. With that, I would also tell you that there's so much information out there. Part of this presentation will help to guide you as to what resources you should use. I caution people, you know, lots of conversation, the media, obviously, Facebook, I mean, just all sorts of different resources. But I would caution you to ensure that you're using the appropriate resources and from trusted sources. So really the takeaway today, especially for small business owners, I would tell you, if you don't have a team of professionals right now helping to assist you with your small business, seek that out, whether that's us or someone else. But you really need to know that you've got someone, when you've got the question, that you can pick up the phone and call and find out the answer, rather than just doing something and then we're reacting to something. Taking a proactive approach and keeping the information and resources at your fingertips is really the best thing right now. So whether that's, you know, working with a lender, your accountant, a financial advisor, your attorney, whatever those pieces look like, we really want you to utilize the appropriate resources and not just doing things, because we're finding that a lot of things that maybe happened at the front end, or offerings or things that came up, maybe do have other ramifications that people didn't quite understand. And we're seeing those things come up daily. So as business owners, we really want to caution you as to that, and to know that there are resources out there, and that's what we're here for. Next, I'm going to turn it over to William, and he will start kind of going through some very generalized topics that I know if some of you have been on some of these other webinars, maybe have heard bits and pieces. And so we'll share some of that, and if there's questions, please use the chat and we will try and answer those as best we can.
All right, thank you, Laura. So I just wanted to cover a few items, just kind of give some updates and reminders on some of the important legislation that came out at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of those items is the CARES Act. We've all heard about it in some fashion. It was passed into law on March 27th. That's when the president signed it into effect. And it has a lot of impacts on businesses and individuals. So there are a couple items with that I wanted to outline. The first of which is going to be about stimulus checks. Those have gone to individuals. There are income requirements for what that is. But one of the items we've seen in our practice that have come up, we've got a lot of questions about, are when stimulus checks have gone out, they failed to take deceased individuals off of the tax register. So anybody who filed a return for 2018 or 2019, even if they have passed, still got the stimulus monies either direct deposited into a bank account or a paper check sent to them. Those aren't monies that their family can keep. They're not monies that under law you can keep. You actually have to return them. If you got a paper check, most of them actually had deceased individual written next to the name. So the government was well aware that was a problem, but they still sent them out. So there's a lot of resources out there about what to do with those checks. Specifically, you have to send them back to the IRS office in Atlanta. If it was a direct deposit, you have to write a personal check. You would include the decedent's social security number on it and a reference to the stimulus package. And if it was a paper check, you would write void on the check on the memo and signature line and mail it to that Atlanta office. The next piece of that is there's some talk about a second round of stimulus checks coming out. That's not been passed into law yet. That's still something that's pending in Congress. It's a situation to monitor, because part of what the negotiations for that would be is additional relief for small businesses. So whether that's improving or increasing payroll protection funding for those PPP loans, or adding additional access to economic disaster loans from the SBA, those are items that may come out as part of that second round of stimulus checks if another piece of legislation is passed. The next piece of the CARES Act that's very important is there is an employee retention tax credit that's available to employers. It's section 23 or 2302 of the CARES Act. And what this provides is that if you are an eligible employer, you can take a tax credit up to 50% of what your employer-related taxes would be that can be claimed. So your employer-related Social Security taxes, those items. And in order to be an eligible employer, your business either had to be fully or partially suspended as a result of COVID-19, or if you stayed open, your gross receipts during that time period have to be 50% or less of what they were the year prior. So there's a lot of detailed information about those requirements out there that you need to look at to see if you are eligible. And the caveat to this is you can't really double dip either. So a lot of people have been asking, can I claim the tax credit and do a PPP loan? So get the best of both worlds. And the answer is no, you cannot. The government specifically said that if you have received a PPP loan or you do, you're not going to be able to then claim that tax credit as well. They're meant to be mutually exclusive. Another item of the CARES Act that came out is that there is an option for employers to defer employment tax deposits and payments. You're allowed to defer up to 50% that can be paid before December 31st of 21. And then the second half for this time period could be paid before December 31st of 2022. So that is an option instead of making those payroll tax deposits that you can do. Again, part of the restrictions on that comes from those PPP loans. If you receive those, you're ineligible to defer your employment tax deposits. The next item I'm going to address is some information that's more specific to nonprofit organizations and various boards of directors. Typically, we see a lot of those organizations, whether they're homeowners associations, nonprofits who don't do fundraising for causes, or even just a board of directors for a company. They're oftentimes having their annual meetings in the spring or early summer. That just seems to be where they typically fall. And COVID's changed a lot of what that looks like. Many of those meetings have been canceled or restricted due to COVID restrictions, specifically about the number of people that can meet. So a lot of questions have turned into, can we meet virtually? And fortunately, under Iowa law, there are some remedies as to what that's going to look like. That size change is going to start to change here come June 1st, and then again at the end of June. There was the governor's proclamation yesterday to that effect. But mass gatherings and meetings, unless we can properly social distance and certain restrictions are in place, still can't occur for a period of time. So the remedy for that is that the Nonprofit Act in Iowa allows for voting to happen in a couple different ways. The first of which is by written ballots. So anybody who's involved in an HOA or anything else knows you typically would do either an oral vote or a written ballot at the meeting. You can still do that. The ballots can be mailed out to members. They must indicate the number of responses needed for the measure to pass. You have to state the number of responses needed to have a quorum for a meeting. And you also have to specify when that ballot has to be returned. You also can take action as a board by email. The Nonprofit Act allows for a virtual meeting, in essence, to occur by email. But to do that, every single member of that board has to specifically write in their email message, I consent to this action by email, and then type their name. It's a very specific requirement in the Act, but if everybody agrees to do that and so votes, you can do that. The final piece is that proxies. It's something most people who are in an HOA or a nonprofit may be familiar with. That's still allowed under virtual meetings as well. The next piece we want to talk about is staying informed. Laura touched on that a little bit in her opening remarks. We really want to focus on what good sources of information are. There's a lot of ways you can hear about different pieces about COVID through the grapevine, talk to other business owners, talk to friends, talk to family, and people have their own opinions, and that's always going to be the case. But what matters in terms of businesses is you're following the appropriate guidelines that's actually required. You can choose to go above and beyond those guidelines if you do, but there's certain minimums that the state has put in place. So on the screen, you'll see a list of where you can start looking for some of those. This list is not all inclusive, but this is where we see a lot of the various state guidelines coming out, and then some national at the bottom of the Center for Disease Control as well. The governor's office is probably one of the best resources right now. You can read every proclamation Governor Reynolds has issued, word for word. They're all available on the website there, www.governor.iowa.gov. They also typically post press releases daily in terms of numbers, important changes, and what we may see coming next. The Department of Public Health also has a coronavirus section on its website, specifically labeled for business guidance. That's a good source of information as well. And then, like I mentioned, the Center for Disease Control would be kind of that national level. They have some guidance specifically tailored for workplace and businesses. This is just an example you'll see on the screen of some of the items they've posted, provide some guidance as to whether or not you should reopen, if you're capable of reopening, and what steps you need to look at in order to do so safely. So those are great resources to look at as you move forward. The next piece is notaries. We've seen a lot of postings online on social media, people requesting notaries. There is the ability to do remote notarization now. So for any business owners or have employees or themselves are notaries, there's some very specific requirements you have to follow. You want to make sure you get on the Secretary of State's website, talk to somebody who does remote notarization. Some of the requirements are listed there, but the big piece is you have to have specific types of software that allow you to capture that notarial act and record it. And you have to make sure you get 2 types of identification. So driver's license, passport, social security card, all of those items. With that, the last piece I'm going to cover are cases we're going to see some changes in businesses, contract negotiations. That happens. Most people are familiar with force majeure clauses. So if there's an event that prevents fulfillment of a contract, that means the contract may be void. Those weren't specifically tailored for a pandemic. We're going to see some changes in how those are negotiated and written moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Jessica, do we have any questions or chat questions that we need to address from those first pieces that we've gone over?
As of right now, we do not have any questions submitted.
Okay, great. So I will just move forward then. I know the big question weighing on a lot of business owner, employees, employers, people's minds are reopening your business. What does it look like? What does it mean for us? If we were never closed, what's our effect? If we had people working from home and now coming back into the workplace, what does that look like? So this again is where those resources that William talked about are really important. The governor's website in terms of being able to access those proclamations, reaching out to us if you have questions. It does change daily and has been over the last several weeks as we're starting to see reopening in terms of restrictions lifted. Some of that obviously will die down to a certain degree where people are able to start planning. I think that's been the difficult part for businesses, is coming up with a plan as to what reopening looks like with the constant changes. Right now, the important steps really are to follow some basic requirements just in general. So signage, that's required for employers, not only for people coming into the business, but also signage for employees as to what their abilities are if someone tests positive or if they have concerns with COVID. Reviewing the industry-based protocols. So specific industries, take for instance, restaurants are going to have very different requirements than maybe a boutique or other places where spacing and numbers are different. So currently right now, in terms of industry specific, the restaurants have very specific items, and you may see some different signage at restaurants versus the signage that you may just see walking into an office, things like that. Face masks currently are not recommended, but they are recommended but not required, rather, in both the restaurant industry and in other businesses. So that is something that has been questioned a lot. I know that those questions have come up with people that we've dealt with calling in. Do we have to have face masks? Do we have to require our employees to wear face masks? Do people coming in have to wear face masks? Right now, it's a strong recommendation, but not a requirement. That also can be on your signage. Obviously, social distancing, washing hands, enhanced hygiene, all of those kinds of things are still being recommended, and then we would recommend you include that in your signage also. With regards to restaurants, the mandatory items are listed here on the screen. As most of you know, that 50% of normal operating capacity, that's based on fire code. So whatever the operating capacity would be of fire code, it's 50% of that. The group sizes, we've got 6 to no more than 10. We have heard with the recent proclamation that 10-person restriction will also be lifted in June, so we'll be seeing that. The social distancing, is not just a requirement, but mandatory for restaurants in terms of seating. So 6 feet between tables, no self-service food or drink. So you may see if you're going in to order somewhere, any fountain pop stations, things like that all have to be closed off. And just implementing reasonable measures for social distancing and ensuring that staff is taking those measures as well. We've also seen a lot of required items for the cosmetology area. They obviously have just recently opened. They had been closed with the restrictions that were in place. But as people are going out getting haircuts, you're going to see a lot of these requirements, and these are required. So they're mandatory. They're not just recommended, but appointment only basis. You have to be either in a waiting room, or a lot of people are having people wait in parking lots and having them come in. There has to be signage up with regards to if people are experiencing symptoms, and social distancing reminders, and also to wash your hands and those items. As we move forward as employers and business owners, really the concern for a lot of people is, what's the exposure? What happens if an employee or a customer gets sick? What happens if we have people that are concerned with that in terms of our employees and coming back to work? How do we deal with those cases? So in the United States, most employers are covered under OSHA. Some people may have heard of that. A lot of people correlate OSHA with maybe a construction site or things like that. It is something that most employers are actually governed by, and you just don't see them necessarily coming into a private business where a construction site or safety, those things are typically more in the sense of what we used to call normal for OSHA to be going out to view. As this has happened in the pandemic, these are things that employers have to be following the requirements of OSHA, and employers can be cited if they're not following those things. You also have to be cognizant and aware, and this is where I kind of talked earlier, where swift action can be required. So having that team of people. So if you have a sick employee and there's potential exposure to other employees, to customers, dealing with those things in the fashion that they need to be dealt with, and ensuring that the safety requirements are being met once that information has been obtained by the employer. Not doing that could cause potential exposure or liability to the employer. So we want to be very cognizant of that, and that's where having that team of individuals in place, if something happens, will suit you, because you'll have the ability to make those decisions swiftly. We've kind of talked generally about this, but really what we're telling businesses in terms of practicality is communicating, transparency, hygiene. We want the employees to be communicating with the employers. Have they been exposed? Do they have concerns that they've maybe been exposed? Are they showing symptoms? What does that look like? So information can't be passed through several people until it gets to the employer. If an employee thinks that they're experiencing symptoms or that they've been exposed, they need to be open, just as the employer needs to be communicating with the employees. So really keeping those lines of communication open, whether that's updates daily, or if that's meetings, or just having a protocol to say, listen, this is what the steps are that we need to take if these things occur, so everybody's well informed. Employers should be telling employees that if they're not feeling well, they should be staying home, and then determining the measures that need to be taken based on symptoms, based on testing, if there's quarantine, those kinds of things, and making sure those items are followed. And then sharing that with the rest of the employees or any potential exposed individual if there is a positive test. Anyone who has tested positive, obviously, should be staying home, should be following the quarantine regulations. But anyone that may be exposed should be tested, and then during that testing period where they're awaiting results, should be quarantined during that time, and the employer should be sharing that with the other employees to keep those lines of communication open so everyone can be making informed decisions about what happens next. The difficulty with some of this is we're walking a really fine line with, sharing this information and making sure the employees feel safe, but also protecting the privacy of your employees. There are certain things in terms of personal information, medical data, health data, the testing results, all of those kinds of things are important, that we're ensuring that privacy is protected while keeping that balancing act to ensure the remaining business owners, employees, visitors, customers of that business are staying safe. Employers can obviously disclose that information for public health purposes to the appropriate governmental agencies. But that is a fine line. So if there's questions about that, those are things we would really tell you to reach out before you do that, just because there are ramifications with regards to that. Some of the other just general questions, and I know we don't have a slide on that, and I think we've got some questions popping up, but and I'll be more than happy to answer those, is, if you've got an employee handbook and we've got sick leave, and what does this look like? I mean, those things really are still available to you, but the COVID-19 requirements, restrictions, and the regulations that have come down will take precedent over those things. So in terms of what's allowed for people to be off work, if there's a positive test, if a family member has a positive test, if they're caring for an individual, so those things will go by the wayside, and the regulations and requirements of COVID need to be followed. So that's, I know that's a question that comes up for small business owners that have a handbook. And Jessica, I'm not sure, I thought I saw something pop up in Flash. Do we have a couple questions?
Yeah, we do. So if you want, Laura, we can pause, or if you feel like you're at the credit slide. So
yep.
Okay, awesome, perfect timing. So we had somebody submit, is taking temperature of visitors or staff recommended? And then it's kind of like a two-parter. So the second part is there a universal question sheet that can be used to screen customers or staff?
Sure, good question. So right now, temperature is not a requirement, pending, again, business specific. So there are certain areas where that is going to be required. If they've got a specific, business that they want to talk to us about in terms of what does that look like, we're more than happy to answer that specifically. But for most businesses, taking temperature is not going to be required. In terms of a questionnaire, I would tell you that outside of that flow chart on our slide to kind of go through those steps, I don't think there's a questionnaire that's going to fit a case-by-case basis. So if there's something that a certain employer would like to see for customers, visitors, employees, that's something that I would tell you, could be put together based on that industry. But I would caution you, and here again, this is where I would tell you, have someone reviewing that, have someone take a look at it, because we want to ensure that, just as we talked in the previous slide in terms of protected health information, what questions can you ask? There's a fine line there in terms of how far can you go in terms of asking your employees certain things, or guests or visitors certain things. We want to ensure that by doing that questionnaire, we're not creating more exposure. I know there's been a lot of surveys that have gone recently in terms of, how do you feel about certain things? What are the requirements? How would you come back? I think those things are something that are obviously voluntary. So kind of depending on what that questionnaire would be used for, if it's a voluntary basis or if it's something that they're going to require for employees before they can come to work, I think those would be things that we would want to talk about based on an industry specific basis.
And then the other question that was submitted was, can you speak to a business that employs healthcare workers or direct support professionals who are caring for COVID positive people in their homes?
Speak to in this sense, whether or not what? I'm sorry.
Allison, would you be able to maybe expand on your question that you submitted via the chat function? We'll give it a second so she can type.
Sure. Absolutely. So if it's with regards to, face masks, those kinds of things, I mean, those are going to be required in specific industries. So medical spas, medical clinics. So if that question came up with in terms of the masks, if that's where Allison was asking, that's something that's a requirement for those industry specific places. That's accurate, that masks are required.
Okay, it looks like she expanded. So she said the liability of the company, if we know if we know people are exposed in the PPE, we have been able to provide. So it sounds like liability.
So a lot of that's going to depend on steps that are being taken. So once exposure is known, what is being offered to the employees, what restrictions are being put in place, are they following the not only the recommendations, but the requirement of the proclamation. So where you're going to see exposure is really like with anything else. The minute you waver from doing something differently in different scenarios, that's where exposure is going to come. So really what needs to happen is policies need to be made in terms of how things are going to be handled. And then that needs to be followed in each circumstance. So the minute you start wavering and making exceptions, that can create exposure for business owners because you don't have any way to show why you did something one way versus the other way. So ensuring that you're following the same path and requirements for everyone based on what you've determined that to be. So for instance, an employer can't say, we're going to take temperatures and we're going to require, face masks for employees A, B, and C, but employees D, E, and F, you don't have to do this. Now, if they're not in the office place, if they're working from home, that's different, obviously. But you want to ensure that you don't create exposure by veering off from any requirements you've put in place. I'm not sure if that helped to answer Allison's question in terms of exposure, but a lot of that's going to be policy-based in terms of how they've handled positive tests and what requirements they've done, and then ensuring they're followed through. So if they aren't, what are they doing to remedy that situation then? Did that answer it, Allison?
She said thanks, so I'm guessing yes. All right. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions, but as Laura said at the beginning, if you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Laura and William. They're with Lamberti, Gocke Luetje Law Offices, and you can find their contact information on our website, our ankeny.org website. And thanks for everybody who joined us today. We will have the full presentation up on our Facebook page and our YouTube page for you to view. If you missed some of those slides, you'll have access to those here probably within the next 24 hours online. And then just a quick update, we do have just a couple events coming up in June. The most upcoming is going to be our LeaderCast Ankeny. So it'll be a 2 half-day online virtual educational opportunity with 9 world-renowned speakers who will be bringing in through video to talk about positive disruption. So what better topic, right? So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Laura and William, for taking time out of your day to speak. And then I will turn it over to Troy again to say a few words about CJM Financial. Thanks to CJM Financial for sponsoring today. So Troy.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you, William and Laura, for covering this subject today. And obviously, everybody's very interested in changes and steps we need to do to protect clients as well as our own employees, as well as ourselves. So I know we've continued to add different steps as we start to bring people back into our office, but we're still not keeping our customers locked down away from coming in. And so sometime in the future, things will change for all of us, but I guess we're all kind of heading to a new normal, as everybody says. But thank you for the rest of the participants and listening in, and the Chamber is still providing these opportunities to be educated on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy, and thanks, CJM Financial. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good day.